Hey everybody, Marianne Williamson here. What an extraordinary week this is. Joe Biden has won the American presidency, although that fact is being disputed as we speak by the current president, Donald J. Trump. What does this mean? We have to ask ourselves some very, very serious questions. You know, I've worked a lot with people who are cancer survivors, people who have been through terminal diseases, supposedly terminal diseases, and have found themselves surviving the experience. And more often than not, people say, this has changed my life. It has made me think about the purpose of my life and has made me want to make some real changes in the way I live it. And I think that this country has to ask that same kind of question right now. First of all, we have to look in the mirror. Everybody says that right now. Oh, we have to look in the mirror. It's one thing to say it, and it's another thing to do it. We have to ask ourselves, what happened in this country that a phenomenon such as right-wing fanaticism with tints of real fascistic behavior ever grew the kind of political ascendance and platform that it did to begin with? How did we even get here? It would be a big mistake for us not to address that question now. Because if we don't address the question, then we could end up back here sooner than we even think. We could end up back here in 2022. We could end up back here in 2024. You know, there's a television commercial that's on TV a lot right now, and it's a couple who are driving a car. The man is driving, and they have children in the back seat. And they're driving out of their driveway, and you can see that a truck is coming past. And I guess because of some signal on the car, the husband who is driving is reminded that, in fact, there is a truck there and he better stop really quick, and he puts on his brakes. And at that point, you see the husband and wife look at each other with profound shock and relief that the car had stopped in time and they had basically avoided killing their children. I feel that that's a good analogy to what just happened in the United States, except we have to ask ourselves where the analogy ends. What exactly is that truck? Now, in the story of a couple driving out of their driveway, I suppose it's just a random fluke. But in the story of a nation, that truck represents a real threat to our democracy. We missed it this time. We put our brakes on in time this time, but there will be more coming down the road. So we have to ask ourselves, what went so wrong in this country that we ever got to this place to begin with? Now, a lot of people have different ideas about that, and I think that's good. That's what democracy is. It's a marketplace of ideas. And I don't think that any of us have a monopoly on truth. I certainly don't, but I do have some strong ideas. First of all, I think that the 8 years of the Obama presidency was, in fact, maybe not the wonderful stroll through the garden that many Democrats like to think that it was. Income inequality has been growing for the last 40 years. You know, during the 2016 campaign, a lot of people were just shocked that Hillary lost. I was shocked as anybody else, but I was not surprised like a lot of the people that I knew, because I traveled the country so much in my work, and I had recognized, number one, how much just animus there was, this irrational animus against Hillary. But I also realized that there was so much economic despair. That's what I've been seeing in my work for the last 20 years. Just an unbelievable amount of economic tension and anxiety that was among people who had done everything right. I was as shocked as most of my friends were, but I was not surprised, as deeply surprised as other people I knew were. And that is because in my work, I travel a lot and have been for decades, and I hear stories everywhere I go. And so when Hillary was talking about the fact that we just needed to continue the success of Barack Obama, I knew many people who were saying, "What success? I'm drowning here." I was up close and personal with all the rage that people felt. They felt that the economy had been rigged against them, and they were not wrong. So I felt that there was going to be a cry of populist despair and rage, and that was either going to be an authoritarian populism or it was going to be a progressive populism. On the left, the progressive populism was represented by the voice of Bernie Sanders, and on the right, that populism was expressed by the voice of Donald Trump. So I was not someone who was deeply surprised at the fact that that rage expressed itself. Now, I feel very, very strongly that if we just go back now to conditions that people might have thought were so wonderful before the Trump presidency, and not concern ourselves with the fundamental alteration of those patterns that must occur now in order for us to have a result that is any different than the Trump win going forward in 22 and 24, then we have to recognize that fact. We have to recognize the fact that millions and millions and millions of Americans have not looked at the Democrats and associated the Democrats with the kind of traditional democratic values that were there when I was growing up. There was a time in this country when the Democratic Party stood indisputably for working people and for the values of working people and for the needs of working people. But particularly since the 1990s, when money, corporate money, became such an unbelievable undue influence on our politics, there are corporatist elements within both major political parties. The Republican Party is pretty much hook, line, and sinker, bought and sold by this corporatist attitude. And what do I mean by corporatism? Corporatism is when our government does more to advocate for the short-term profit of huge multinational corporations than it does to advocate for the safety and the health and the well-being of the American people. But the Democratic Party has its own corporatists. They are soft corporatists. But corporatism always brings forth injustice. And so what too often the Democratic Party has done is to institutionalize what I call soft injustice. They address all the pain on the periphery that is produced by corporatism, but they are unwilling to challenge the underlying forces that create all that suffering and make it inevitable. And that's where the real battle is going to be now. There's been a lot of talk about healing the soul, a battle for the soul of America. You might know that I wrote a book called Healing the Soul of America in the late 90s. Well, the next great battle that's going to be raging is for the soul of the Democratic Party, because a lot of people sort of like to think we can have it both ways. In the 1990s, when Bill Clinton formed the Democratic Leadership Council, that was really the whole point, to show that the Democratic Party, we could play with the big boys too, and we would need to in order to raise all that corporate money. Now, I do remind you that Hillary Clinton raised a whole lot more money than Donald Trump did. And she still lost that election. Because in the final analysis, passion and conviction and energy are more important than money. And when you make your bottom line raising money rather than telling the truth with conviction, then you might gain in terms of your financial coffers, but you lose in terms of the energy that really moves people, touches their hearts, and make them act. So fortunately, people realized that we were way too close to the cliff, that we had an authoritarian neo-fascist in our midst. Not everybody agrees with that, but that's certainly the way I see it. And it's the way enough people see it that Biden won the election. But this does not mean that we can relax. I'm also very concerned because, the Proud Boys, the Bugaloos, all those, when President Trump had told them, what was it, stand back and stand by, for my taste, they're almost a little too quiet right now. What's going to happen? Today, as I record this, the president has fired Mark Esper, who was the Secretary of Defense. Now, Mark Esper is someone who came out of the military defense contracting background, but he has proven himself to be a rational human being. And to me, the fact that he was fired today is not good news. So, everyone needs to be on alert. Everybody needs to be thinking deeply. And each and every one of us, I think, needs to be taking a good look in the mirror as American citizens. A lot of that has started going on as we look into the realities of slavery, the realities of racial injustice, the realities of income inequality, the fact that we don't have so much a healthcare system as we have a sickness care system, how dominated our policies have been by major corporate interests because of the undue money influence, financial influence that they have on the system. Health insurance companies, big pharmaceutical companies, gun manufacturers, chemical companies, big agriculture, food companies, big oil, fossil fuel companies, tech companies, military industrial contracts, and banks and other financial institutions. They either get to have the final say in American public policy, or the health and well-being of the American people is our bottom line. I believe that we have to shift. We have to fundamentally shift from an economic to a humanitarian bottom line. A lot of people think that if you improve your economy, that will improve the human condition. But I believe you improve the human condition, and that will improve your economy. Because I don't think money comes from crumbs that are dropped from the table of these corporate aristocrats in the form of job creation. I believe that money is what comes from the creativity and the productivity of the American people. So anything that helps people thrive, I think that should be the organizing principle of American public policy, not that which would support corporate interests through increased corporate subsidies, increased tax cuts for the very, very wealthy and corporations, et cetera. You know, back in the 1950s when Eisenhower, Republican President Eisenhower was president, corporations in the United States, their tax rate paid 33% of our public treasury. And today it's only 11%. And too much of that money is now at the expense of the things that people need, whether it has to do with healthcare or education. A lot of people right now think that the message of this election is that Joe Biden won as a moderate. I passionately disagree with that. If he had stood for Medicare for all, if he had stood for a Green New Deal, if he had stood for the cancellation of college loan debts, who's to say he wouldn't have won by even a larger margin? You know, one of the things I notice about Republicans is that if they say something and you don't like it, their tendency is to say it again, even louder. But Democrats, if they say something and you don't like it, they tend to wrap themselves up in trying to figure out how to say it a different way or to step back a few feet so as not to offend someone. But, you know, conviction is a force multiplier. I think those of us who stand with the American people in supporting Medicare for all, in supporting a Green New Deal, in supporting the cancellation of the college loan debt, we need to say it loud and we need to say it proud. People who realize that we must address income inequality. There must be direct cash relief in the form of a UBI, not only going backwards to the beginning of the pandemic, but also going forward. We must cut these corporate subsidies. We must tax the very, very rich and corporations fairly. I agree with Elizabeth Warren that there should be a wealth tax on the top, the very, very top earners in this country. People who make over $500 million, they can afford to pay a 2% tax. Those who make $1 billion and over, they can afford a 3% tax. And you and I both know they wouldn't even feel it in the course of their normal day. So things have got to change. We've got to change how police are trained. We've got to change police practices. We've got to actually address all of the different ways that racial systemic prejudice is built into so many of the ways we operate in this country. I think the American people are ready to do that. That was my experience when I was running for office. I think we're good and decent people, and I think that what we need is a politics that is visionary and not just transactional, and a politics that does not just speak to people's selfishness, but speaks to people's capacity and potential, and I think even yearning for nobility and dignity and decency and intelligence. So that's what we need to do going forward. We can't just relax and say, oh, okay, now Biden became president, so it'll all be okay now. No. The people who were so interested in Trump to begin with, and remember, they're still out there. And I believe we need to provide for the American people something more than a future that is devoid of Trump. We need to provide for people a future that is devoid of the economic tension and anxiety and despair that has become so much a part of people's daily lives. That is what is going to change things. And when you're talking about Medicare for all, and you're talking about what it would mean for people to know that they don't have to worry about healthcare if they get sick, when you're talking about knowing that we could have free college tuition at state colleges and universities, what that would mean in lessening the tension of so many Americans who don't know how they can send their kids to college. When we talk about something like a Green New Deal, when we talk about something like the cancellation of America's college loan debt, we have $1.5 trillion debt that is represented by the loans of 45 million people who live with the daily anxiety of knowing they don't know how they are going to pay off those loans. And in too many cases, the job that they got the education for, that they now owe the debt for, was in order to actualize their dreams. But now they don't feel that they can even work in that area, because if they work in that area, they don't know how they'll be able to pay off those debts. So there are so many people who get up in the morning. They go to jobs that they don't like, but they're there only for the health care and the benefits. They go there only because they think, well, maybe if I have this job, I can pay off these college loan debts. This depresses people. That means more than a quote unquote mental health crisis. That's suppressing and depressing the energy that in fact drives the engine of prosperity and peace. So we have to articulate a new vision for a new America. And I hope you feel that on this podcast, some of the people that we speak to, hopefully all of the people that we speak to, are those that help us do that. My guest today is Andrew Yang, and Andrew has a lot of ideas about what we need to be and where we need to go going forward. I've known Andrew since early in the campaign season. I have always enjoyed talking to him, and I'm so glad that we can talk today in a way that you can hear, because I think many of the things that we talk about are things that all of us do care about deeply. Also, make sure that you hang around until the end of the podcast, because we have a section called Ask Marianne. You can write to me and ask your questions at Marianne@castmedia.com. That's Cast, K-A-S-T. Write to me at Marianne@castmedia.com. Tell me the things that you'd like to hear me talk about, questions that you would like me to answer. To me, that's one of my favorite parts of what we're doing here. Thanks. Andrew Yang, I can't think of anybody I would rather be with today than you. You are among the people who deserve a congratulations, because you, of course, have worked very hard to make this happen.
The entire country deserves a congratulations. The end of the Trump era, Joe Biden, the new president. And I thought about you today as well, Marianne, because I remember your warnings on the campaign trail that Donald Trump was not a politician, but kind of this avatar of this dark force or energy that had plugged into something primal in the minds and spirits of many, many Americans. And I thought of that when he was outperforming expectations in the polls in districts around the country. Even though he's losing, I am stunned by how many people came out to vote for him, particularly given that turnout surged. And when turnout surged, I thought that the turnout was driven by the fact that everyone wanted to be rid of the guy. But it turns out there were extra Trump voters in a lot of these communities. So I really did think of you as the results were coming in.
Well, thank you. My point, of course, has been that he has ushered in an era of political theater, and that we will not be going back, that the president is not just a politician. He's a phenomenon. And unfortunately, that phenomenon continues to exist. He is a cult leader. He is a political cult leader. And there are many people standing behind him, waiting in the wings to take up that baton, should he choose to pass it to someone else. So that larger issue of what to do with this collectivized hatred that he has harnessed. I heard Joe Biden speak today, and I thought he was wonderful. And I thought he struck just the right tone. It was the absolute right tone that we need to help bring the country back together. He sounded very presidential, but still, what you're saying is true. Carolyn Mace, in my conversation with her, talked about Trump as a dark magician, as a shapeshifter. He definitely has all of the attributes of a political cult leader, and the problem does remain with us and is something for Democrats not to ignore.
Well, Trumpism definitely is not going to go away, and Trump himself may not go away either, even if, as I expect, Joe will win the Electoral College and then Trump will litigate but lose the presidency. He still may wind up tweeting regularly and starting a TV network and reaching out to his followers on the regular. He could even create his own faux Oval Office, or like you could literally have, to your point, like a theatrical shadow presidency, which is essentially the polar opposite of what most ex-presidents have done, which is recede from public view and let their successor do the job. So that's one possibility. I agree with you that there are many, many folks who want to pick up the baton in his orbit. There's waiting in the wings. Another very negative phenomenon was that I endorsed a few dozen congressional candidates around the country, including people who are running against kind of acolytes of Trump, like this Madison Cawthorn candidate in North Carolina. And I was also staggered by how well some of Trump's proteges performed, where there were many, many avid followers and supporters in districts around the country.
Well, we now have QAnon supporters who are going to be in Congress, so it's a new day, and I think that's really what I want to talk to you about today is the future of the Democratic Party, where we go from here. We've all been in agreement that the first thing we had to do was to break the free fall of American democracy. The first thing we had to do was to make sure that Trump did not get a second term, and I think people like you and myself and many, many others knew that first order of business had to be taken care of. That his presidency represented an existential threat to democracy itself. Now, we also know, as you just said, he probably will not follow the traditions of ex-presidents. He didn't follow the traditions of current presidents. So we know that we will still have Trump to deal with in some form. But I think, Andrew, that something was very, very wrong that it was even this close. I mean, this is a man who represents nothing short of a neo-fascist threat in this country. And the fact that this many millions of Americans voted for him, the fact that this many few Americans in relation to that voted for the Democrats, it seems to me the real battle now is going to be for the soul of the Democratic Party. How do you see that?
I couldn't agree more that there has to be some soul searching in response to the clobbering that many Democrats got in communities around the country. You and I spent a lot of time in Iowa over the last 2 years. And I was campaigning with J.D. Scholten, who was running for Congress. I had a conversation with Abby Finkenauer, who was a Democratic member. And members seldom lose. And Abby lost. And J.D. Scholten campaigned his heart out and lost in Steve King's former district. What happened in Iowa happened in Texas, in districts that were turning purple and people thought would be competitive. It happened in North Carolina. It happened all over the country. There is something wrong with what the Democratic Party is doing to connect with a lot of these communities, because if there was a repudiation, unfortunately, it was a repudiation. A lot of Democrats in these races, and it pained me so much. It hurt me because you have Donald Trump, the top of the ticket, who is just this terrible, terrible leader. And if there was any occasion for folks to come out in droves and want to turn the page, it was against him. And instead, there were so many people that stuck with him. And it did a number on this hope for a blue wave that would increase the Democratic control of Congress and would potentially, I thought, take the Senate majority and have a unified government for Joe. But instead, Mitch McConnell is still going to be the majority leader, it looks like, at this point. The Democrats do need to do some serious soul searching, in my opinion.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. And I, too, we did our Progressive Candidate Summit. Many of the candidates that we were supporting were the same in many cases as yours. It's heartbreaking to me. Mike Siegel was fabulous in Texas.
Mike Siegel was great.
Julie Oliver was fabulous in Texas. And
she was so
and
good.
I cannot believe that J.D. Scholten did not win. It's
Me
heartbreaking.
neither.
These are people who would have been so great in Congress. I think a lot of people did awaken, largely because of your efforts, my efforts, and the efforts of so many, to the fact that Congress is a co-equal branch. And it's terrible that we did not win the Senate back. On the other hand, I think that that's exactly where we should begin, with having a serious conversation about the soul searching of the Democratic Party we're talking about. Case in point, Andrew, is Kentucky. So Amy McGrath was a Marine, and she made one admittedly great TV ad about a year ago. So Chuck Schumer, who is a Northeast liberal, okay, let's be real about who Chuck Schumer is, but he is in charge of the Democratic senatorial campaign, and he presumes to know what Kentuckians want. Or Kentuckyites, I'm not sure. So he comes in there, he gets Democrats all over the country to give $100 million for a war chest for Amy McGrath, when so clearly in that primary, the energy was with Charles Booker. The energy was with Charles Booker. You could feel it. The Shakti was everywhere. They were neck and neck. You could feel who had the energy. And Chuck Schumer comes in there with that same paternalistic view that so many of that elite Democratic establishment have. And he imposed Amy McGrath on Kentucky. And that seems to me to be the problem over and over and over again, where the Democratic Party needs to step aside and let democracy reign.
Marianne, I had a conversation with Matt Jones, who goes by the moniker Kentucky Sports Radio. Do you know of Matt? And he talked about the anointment of Amy McGrath
Exactly.
by Chuck Schumer and the Democratic Party. And Matt's point was that we should let the primary figure itself out, and that Washington should not have its finger on the scale as to who the Democratic Party chooses.
Absolutely. And you and I both know that that was played out on the presidential level as well. And that's where I think that the battle for the soul of the Democratic Party is going to occur right now. I hope the first thing that happens is that Tom Perez resigns. I think that it's time for us to stop. We have a very codependent relationship with the leadership of the Democratic Party. And these people, very nice people, some of whom I respect for some of what they've done. But it's very interesting, one of the reasons, tell me what you think about this. I'm really curious your thoughts about this because you come from the private sector. In business, if it's failing on Wednesday, you change it by Saturday. And that's one thing that the Republicans know. Most of them come not only from the private sector, but from a respect for the private sector. If it's not working on Wednesday, you change it by Saturday.
Or change it by
Yeah,
Thursday.
really, exactly. But with
Yeah.
Democratic politics, it doesn't have that perspective. If efficacy, efficiency, whether or not you're actually succeeding, doesn't seem to be the bottom line. It doesn't work on Wednesday. They do it again the same way on Friday. And if it doesn't work the same way well on Friday, they think if they just add more money to the pour more money into the problem, then it will work on Monday. And when it comes to Nancy Pelosi as Speaker of the House, when it comes to Chuck Schumer as heading the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, isn't it time for us to ask that a certain kind of corporatist elite step aside and let this new wave of energy, particularly progressive energy, try to take it from here?
And that was Matt's point about the selection of Amy McGrath, was that he said it was a financial decision where Chuck Schumer looked at it and said, well, she can raise money, so less of a headache for me because of that great ad you're talking about. And he said, look, I don't expect to win this race anyway, so if someone can raise money and create a fundraising headache for the other side, then that's a relative win. And that's like a very, very let's call it inhuman or inorganic way to try and select a candidate. It's using numbers, not anything about the individual. And we need to roll the dice with individuals more because sometimes the individual will catch fire and something surprising will happen. The thing you don't want to do is be that jaded machine where you're looking up saying, well, this person can raise X, this person can raise X, so that's how we're going to make this determination.
We have seen this over and over again. Hillary raised a lot more money than Trump did in 2016. And if you look at the specifics of what you're mentioning with your conversation about Kentucky, Amy McGrath raised $100 million, or more specifically, Chuck Schumer raised for her $100 million. And in the final analysis, in her race against Mitch McConnell, she only got 2 percentage points more than Marquita Bradshaw in Tennessee, who raised a tiny fraction of that amount. One of the things that the Democrats, it seems to me, do need to realize is that money is not as powerful as energy. It's not as powerful as excitement. It's not as powerful as passion. And so much of the passion, so much of the energy in the Democratic Party is on the side of the progressives. And it's not only not embraced.
They are money heavy. They're money heavy and energy light. That is
exactly.
the problem. Money heavy and energy
So the
light.
progressives not only represent the energy and the enthusiasm, not only are they not embraced by the Democratic elite, they've actually been suppressed. I mean, if Biden wins, it's because enough progressives voted to get him over the line. But he's still too close to the line. What are we going to do to make sure that the corporatists in the Democratic Party make space for its natural constituency on the left? And I see you as an important bridge builder here because you are one of the few people who has a real conversation with both sides of that line. The corporatists love you, and so do the progressives.
So here's what I think is happening right now is that if you take a mainstream centrist corporate Democrat, whoever we're describing, that person's probably fairly successful, probably pretty wealthy at this point, and then there is a reflexive resistance on their part to progressive ideas, dramatic change. And in my case, like, I think these changes only seem dramatic because they should have happened decades ago. And because they didn't happen decades ago, now we have to try and make them happen now. And then it seems very big. So I completely agree with you that there's reflexive resistance on their part. And I hope I can build that bridge because I feel like I get I get the private sector. I think that the Republicans, to your earlier point, do have a more results-oriented, efficacy-driven mindset than the Democrats. And the Democrats, when things go wrong for them, they tend to blame anyone but themselves. Honestly, like they'll blame. The most destructive thing is that they'll blame the people that they're trying to reach. They'll be like, "Oh, you are, uneducated, unsophisticated, in some cases just hateful and racist," and say like that is why we did not win in your area, and that's both unproductive because that's a terrible way to try and win people over, but it also keeps you from actually evolving and advancing in some of the directions you're talking about.
Well, one of the things that you mentioned a couple of minutes ago was that this does not only apply to the presidential races, both this year and in 2016, but it applies to some devastating consequences in these congressional races, even this year. There's a repudiation of the Democratic Party on the part of way too many people. It is not just a neutrality about the Democratic Party. It is a proactive repudiation of the Democratic Party. And in my opinion, it's because of the way that the Democrats have too often deviated from the traditional core values of the Democratic Party. Now, when you talk about
I agree with you.
and so when you talk about how the institutional Democrats, the corporatists, the elite establishment has a reflexive, I think you said reflexive resistance. This is an arrogance. It is a smugness. I call it the smug bastards club. It is a
Marianne, you don't understand how this works. like that would be like the kind of smug bastard centrist. Anyway, sorry. That's my invitation.
Andrew, I'm right. I'm right. And it goes deep because it is an obeisance to the corporate donors that they feel this loops back into the money that they feel that they need to have in order to win elections. They feel that they cannot go too far because if they go too far, they will offend the donors that they feel they need to win elections. Then because of they're not going far enough, they then lose elections and feel that they need to raise more money. I mean, when you say the Democrats have to look in the mirror, as long as the process of soul searching is headed by the current leadership who has such a resistance to that soul searching, how is anything going to change? That's why it's going to be a real battle for the soul. I would assume that the AOCs and others like her are going to say enough is enough and this needs to change now. Do you think I'm wrong?
I think you're 100% right on the need. The question to me now is, what does this dynamic look like if you have a Republican-led Senate and then you go to Joe or Democrats in Congress and you try and push on various things, and then they'll say, look, it's Mitch McConnell back to his obstructionist ways. You're seeing this somewhat with the stimulus package or the second relief bill that has not passed yet, even though it's November and the last one was in March or April, where you probably saw I just came out and said, look, we should just pass a relief bill. And if we can get it done and it's not perfect, that would still be better for the millions of struggling American families right now because it's winter. And if you don't pass it now, you might have to wait until February and the rest of it. And there were some folks who attacked me saying, like, why are you calling out both parties on this? Like, why aren't you just labeling Mitch as the obstructionist? And I was like, look, of course, I think, I'd love it if Mitch freaking just signed the HEROES Act. But, we should all take responsibility here because the fact is there is this ongoing negotiation. Like at that time, there was very high political pressure on Steve Mnuchin to try and cut some kind of deal. And you could see even then, Marianne, there's like this unfortunate triangulation going on where where folks who are Democratic loyalists would attack me for trying to put any responsibility on Nancy Pelosi and and whatnot. I'd be like, well, like, do I think that Mitch McConnell shares responsibility? Of course. Like, would I prefer that he just again sign off? Yes, but like in this world we live in, like, does Nancy have some agency flexibility? Like, can she actually make a big decision if she wants to? Yes. And just like punting it to the other side and saying their fault, like, doesn't help the struggling American families. So when you talk about the dynamic in Congress for AOC and whatnot, I think that's going to be the unfortunate dynamic, is that people look at AOC and being like, what are you attacking us for? It's like, it's Mitch in the Senate.
Well, there are a lot of things that you just brought up, and they all center around, and I totally agree with you, the need for this stimulus. When Nancy Pelosi said that she hoped that there would be another payment by Election Day, I pointed out that there were American families all over this country hoping there would be enough food by Election Day. We have a serious issue of hunger in the United States.
Did you see her appearance on Wolf Blitzer that came about during this time? Did you see
No.
this? It's worth. It's worth seeing. It was not. It was not a very confidence-inspiring conversation.
We have, as you know, 40% of Americans couldn't even afford, even before the pandemic, could not afford a $400 unexpected expenditure. And now more than 8 million more people have been drawn into poverty than was true even before. During the 1940s, 1930s in the United States, when the Depression occurred and there was such terrible poverty, the question was what to do about it. Today, there's such terrible poverty, and we're the way we're dealing with it is almost like pretending it's not there. You see it covered very little. Maybe Wolf Blitzer did a show. I'm happy he did, but you know as well as I do that with the mainstream media on the left as well as on the right, they are not showing the images every day the way I believe they should be in order to keep this conversation alive. And my kudos to you, to Ro Khanna. People like yourselves, like myself, keep saying, what about direct cash relief? Now, my question to you is, and I agree with you about Nancy. And this is why I believe that it's time for Nancy Pelosi to step down as leader. Her responses are often performative, is the word they would use today. Like, she's mad. Like, we're supposed to think that's going to matter. It's not enough that you're mad. It's not enough that you're frustrated. You need to do something. So let me ask you this. How do you see it? Mitch McConnell will still be head of the Senate. What do you see Joe Biden doing? What will you be pushing Joe Biden to do? Is there an executive order? How do you see Joe Biden handling this so that we can get direct cash relief into the hands of people who so desperately need it at this time?
I remain optimistic on cash relief because it's common sense. So many Americans of any party and every community need it. You had this $2 trillion price tag hanging out. Mitch said that was too high. They proposed something in the $500 billion range. The fact is, of the $2.2 trillion CARES Act, the vast majority of that, and most people don't do the math. So everyone knows about the $1,200 payment and the unemployment benefit enhancement for the early part of the pandemic. All of that money amounted to less than 10% of this 2.2 trillion. The vast majority of the money just went to giant corporates. I mean, you know that, your people know that. But a lot of people are like, oh, the stimulus bill was that $1,200 check. It's like, no, that was, a few percentage of what this thing is. So you can get money to people and not have it be that big a price tag relative to a lot of other things. It seems like Mitch is focused on the price tag. And so I'm cautiously optimistic that we can agree on a cash relief package that is below that threshold. There are other components of what they were arguing for that I do believe in. Like, I do think that we should have aid to local cities and states. I think that that there were other points in the bill that were worth fighting for. But I think for the average American family, they're focused, like you said, on food. They don't know what's going on in these other dimensions. They just know whether they can feed their family.
Well, the numbers, though, there's a mathematical sleight of hand going on here. This is true with the bailout conversation now, just as there was in 2008. The issue is not just how much money you spend. The issue is who the money goes to. And just as in 2008, they spent money, but the money went more to Wall Street than to Main Street. And the This,
Oh yeah,
yes,
$4 trillion that time. Like no one saw a
yes,
dime. It just
right.
went to
And
the
the
banks.
template now is the same, but on steroids. And we also have to face the fact, I believe, that it was the Democrats who created that template in 2008. So when they throw around numbers like how much are we going to spend, we need to be having the deeper conversation of where's that money going to. When you see places like,
If we got $2 trillion, like that would be $1,200 a month for everyone for like a year. I mean, like that's legitimately a bunch of money.
I'd like to see 2,000 a month, actually. But even if it was 1,200, they should get it retroactively. And of course, it should also be the UBI going forward when this pandemic is over.
And this is something I've been pushing for very hard, Marianne. There were 41 co-sponsors in the House of the Emergency Money for the People Act, and the folks that I was endorsing wanted to join that group. So the people that won, thank you for anyone who supported the folks who are running. We hope to try and spearhead that $2,000 a month bill you're talking about, because it's a real bill. It's got real co-sponsors. If they can get up to, let's call it 100 co-sponsors, it has a chance to pass.
But wait a minute. How is that going to pass? I mean, even after January 20th, the Senate is still going to be controlled by the Republicans. So how are you going to make that happen? And that's my question. How can Joe Biden change that?
If you ask me what I'll be telling Joe, everyone knows what Andrew Yang's all about. I'll be like, hey, Joe, cash relief. And the threshold I'm asking for is 6 months or until the economy returns to pre-pandemic employment levels, which is unfortunately going to be much longer than 6 months. So I'm arguing for 6 months to make it something that different types of legislators can get behind. And this is a proposal that I'm going to be beating the drum on to Joe, to members of Congress, and that there is some support around this in Congress. So we're not starting at zero. But this to me would be the most important step we can take to help people right now.
But how are people going to live through till January 20th? I mean, I think that even this conversation lacks the human dimension of realizing how many people, as we speak, and I know you know because you talk about it all the time as well. How are these people going to even make it till
unconscionable that
January?
this bill wasn't passed months ago. I know, like that's why to me waiting until election day was so negligent. Where this thing should have been passed, July 31st before the first package's benefits ran out. So I'm angry on behalf of the people that are struggling, and they don't even know who to blame. And our standards for our leaders are so low. Like other countries did much more for their people with less resources.
Yeah, that's right. Like in England, they gave 80% of people's salaries, and so many millions of Americans think, well, we just need to get back to work and reopen the economy, but they don't realize that the reason they are so desperate to go back to work is because they are not being taken care of by their government the way citizens of other countries are.
I genuinely think not passing the stimulus bill helped to drive some of the negativity that drove the Trump vote during this election. Because if you leave people to their own devices and they're flailing around, they're much more susceptible to terrible ideas and ideology and leadership and blame and the rest of it. Like if we had demonstrated that we cared about our people, I think we would have seen more people act with optimism than negativity when it came to hitting the ballot box.
Well, I want to talk to you about that. First of all, I think that the American people over the last few decades have been trained to expect too little, and we're at a point where.
Well, what they've been trained is the performance you're talking about. It's like as long as you make the performative gesture, then that is actually like the new form of governing.
Yeah.
And so then they're all engaging in like kabuki contests, and I'm like, I don't care about I don't care about like what your feelings were. And neither does the person who's suffering.
I couldn't agree with you more. I couldn't agree with you more. And of course, they've been successful at calling any policy which actually serves the people, which actually is aligned with the principle of the people, by the people, and for the people. Our political opponents have been successful at making people think that would be socialist or, hammers and sickles. I mean, you suggest that the resources of the government in any way serve the citizens of the United States, and you're called a socialist or worse. And we laugh at that, but it's actually very serious. It's part of Trump's technique, and all the other Trumps that are standing in line, who will be standing in line to run in 2004, Tom Cotton and others, I'm sure will be using that same technique.
And the media, don't forget the media. The media also try to um, make light of any proposal that seems like it's other
That's
people
right.
for the
That's
people,
right.
where
Right.
they caricature you as non-serious and that you don't understand
Right. You
economics.
don't understand economics. Right. Yeah, you don't understand economics. But they have created their view of what they call sophisticated economics has created the largest income inequality since 1929, such a massive transfer of wealth that 1% owns more wealth than the bottom 90%. Tens of millions of Americans live with chronic economic tension and anxiety, but they say they're the sophisticates about economics. And then, of course, they talk about how they really care about the mental health crisis in the United States, but don't seem to acknowledge how much of that mental health crisis emerges from the fact that so many people live with chronic economic tension and anxiety every single day, not knowing how they will send their kids to college, not knowing what will happen if they get sick or if their children get sick, how they will pay off their college loans, etc. So let me ask you, we have an inauguration. I am one of those people who did not understand why we were not running, giving people a real alternative. To me, that real alternative would have been Medicare for all, would have been a Green New Deal, would have been a serious release of those college loans, et cetera. What kind of president is Biden going to be, do you think? I know that he had said repeatedly in earlier days that he felt that Obama was too timid. And you always got the feeling he would have gone much further in places if he himself had been president. Do you think he is going to be as careful as president as he was careful as candidate?
I think he's going to go as big as he's able to, Marianne, and that's from a conversation I had with him. At this point, it'd be a number of months ago. It was early in the pandemic, but the ideas we were exchanging were that he thought, and he was right, that we needed a new deal to try to resuscitate our country and economy, and so he was thinking very big at that time. I think he's going to have a massive infrastructure plan, and that's something that was at least historically been bipartisan. I think the infrastructure plan is going to be tied in to the plan to try and make us more resilient in the face of climate change. I think it'll have a very significant price tag. I think it'll be trying to generate a lot of jobs. So that's one thing I know is going to be on the table. But I do believe he understands the size of the hole we have, and also understands that it's up to the government to help fill that hole. Yeah, I don't think he'll be timid, put it that way.
When he starts making his appointments, obviously everybody's going to be watching very closely. We certainly hope and are assuming you'll get an appointment having to do with technology, et cetera, and entrepreneurship in his administration. But when it comes to Treasury, when it comes to Secretary of State, when it comes to EPA, when it comes to so many of the agencies, everybody's holding our breath. You know, is he going to go with the sort of corporate line? Is he going to, in some cases, even appoint Republicans? Or is he going to let in the likes of the Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren? What do you think is going to happen? Because I can tell you what's going to happen if he stays too moderate and leaves out the progressives.
I saw that Elizabeth Warren wants to be the Treasury Secretary, and I absolutely love that role for her. It's kind of made for it, and you could say either born for it or has been living for it and working for it for a long time. So that strikes me as a great fit. That's the kind of appointment I hope he makes. As I agree with you that if he appoints folks that don't have a big enough vision as to where we have to go, then we'll be left with incremental change at a time when you need much more dramatic change than that.
Well, that's exactly the point, the issue of whether incremental change will be enough. And if we only have incremental change and not fundamental change, then we will be back here in 4 years. And we could have someone running.
This election convinced me we have no time at all. I thought we had a window or whatnot, but seeing all these votes for Trump around the country, I was like, wow, things have gotten very dark and nasty very quickly. we should have done all of this, like, again, months and years ago. We're at a tougher place than even I thought. I thought we'd have a better result, even though I'm thrilled Joe's winning and going to be president. But I thought that there was still enough optimism in the country to want better.
This is where you and I have always had our conversation has always been one in which I've always felt like I appear the cynic between us. And I don't feel that I was cynical. I feel that I was a realist. I was saying a long time ago, my phrase, dark psychic forces of collectivized hatred. And if we had taken more seriously the danger of all this collectivized hatred a year ago, I think that our response to it would have been more sophisticated by now. Democrats have a hard time naming evil, calling fascism out. By the time, I know when I did my town hall, the CNN town hall, I think you and I did ours the same night, right?
Back to back,
I remember because I called
that.
you and said, come join us for dinner. And I said, we have a fascist threat in our midst. I think it took far too long for that word to be used. I think far too long for the threat to go out. By the time
you might have coined it. You might have coined it, Marianne, because you were one of the first, I think.
Absolutely. And that, how I felt, and I would say throughout the campaign, was that the only way to really respond in an adequate way to big lies is with big truth. Now, we're squeaking out this campaign, thank God. But you and I agree that's not going to be enough. And I have always felt that whereas we know the kind of liar that Donald Trump is, but the kind of truth teller that the Democratic Party has become is not enough. It's when you go into a court of law and you raise your hand, you swear to tell the truth and the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And too often the Democratic establishment message is the truth, but it's not the whole truth and it's not nothing but the truth. And that is because of how much they too are tied to the same donor class. And it seems to me, if we're going to have the serious soul searching of the Democratic Party and a willingness to look in the mirror, it's going to have to be because we recognize how the Democratic Party has sold out its own values and principles. Going back to when Bill Clinton began the Democratic Leadership Council in the 1990s, where the message was, we can play with the big boys too. You can't really have it both ways. You can't really function in a way that serves primarily the bottom line of short-term profit maximization for your corporate donors, and at the same time, make your bottom line service to the health, well-being, safety, and protection of the American people and the earth and the people of the world. And that's what we've tried to do. Ooh, we can have it both ways. And that's where sometimes you and I think, have a conversation where I always end up feeling like I had this dark, cynical vision, which is simply, I'm not so sure. I think at a certain point, you have to draw your line in the sand. And that's the line I believe will have to be drawn by the Democratic Party, or we will continue to lose the passions of the American people.
I don't see you as dark and cynical at all, for what it's worth, but I understand what you mean, because what's happened is market-based thinking has just brainwashed so many people in our political class of both parties. And there was a certain point in the Democratic Party where they started thinking, hey, we can serve both masters, to your point. It's like we can serve the market and do it in a way that's going to be like more inclusive in the rest of it. But it turns out that these things are actually very much pulling you in opposite directions. And if you try and serve them both, you're going to be bullshitting like a lot of the time. So you would practically have to turn.
I want to say something right here, because I think it's really funny about my relationship with you. Your genius is something you just did. You told the truth and then you laughed. You told it the way it is. That's just bullshitting. I go, that's just bullshitting. And then everybody's angry at me because I appear angry. But that's really what's amazing about you, actually. But you said it yourself. It's bullshit to think you can serve both masters. It's bullshit. So what are we going to do about that?
The goal is that you say, look, the bottom line is human beings and families, and we have to stop pretending that the profitability of that company is society's bottom line. And so we should, and here's one very, very important idea, Marianne, that I'm going to start trying to get out there into the world. I'd love your help. So the frustration that I think you and I share is that we are devolving into this political theater where it's like I make certain performative gestures that show that I'm a good person, and then I point out your shoddy performative gestures that show that you're a bad person, and then that person translates to their following that no, like the other person is self-right, and nothing actually happens. Nothing really
That's right.
changes for the people. Like the people are all being like, like why am I supposed to care about this? They get turned off by the whole thing. Media gets in on it because the conflict drives ratings. So how do we break out of this performative cycle? And the vision I have is something called evidence-based governing, which
Evidence-based what?
governing.
Well, that's what that Patricia Gruhl book is. That book, there's a book with the woman, I think you had her on your Yang Speaks, who talks about that.
Is it Catherine Gale and political innovation, or there's like, yeah.
All right, so go on, please. Tell us what that is.
So the goal is to go to, let's say, Democrats and say, hey, what are your goals? And then it'd be like, oh, to like get people healthier, and be like, okay, then let's figure out what the baseline is of like people's mental health and life expectancy and access and like kids, and then let's try and raise it. And right now, unfortunately, like our lawmakers are not truly accountable for that measured reality. They're just accountable again for whether they said the right words and made the right sounds.
Well,
so
yeah.
what you can do is that then a basic example for me, what given my platform is like, what's the poverty rate? What, like 8 million Americans fell into poverty since May? Well, that's fucking terrible. We should do something about that. And so you can try and follow these things. And then for Republicans, are there measurements that they would love that, I frankly would be like, I would accept? I'm going to throw one out there, like they're really big fans of labor force participation rates. Like, yeah, that's not a terrible measurement by my standard either. It's like, you have more people doing stuff, like, sure, we'll give it to you. And just try and drive people to a point where, like, at least you're trying to drive a goal, and then you can see what happened to the goal. And we can agree on that. This would be a step forward just because there'd be some objective reality that we can look at it. You can say, well, this is what happened. And it's no longer just like, I argued this and you're bad and I'm good and I just gin up my people.
This is where you and I always end up, which is all that sounds very, very nice. Our goal is that there is a health quotient among the American people. And I do agree with you that, between high-minded conservative ideals and high-minded liberal ideals, there is a yin and a yang that can be respected. As Eisenhower said, the American mind is at its best is both liberal and conservative. However, none of that takes into account what's really happening in this country, which is in a sense neither liberal nor conservative. It is corporatist. So we can talk all we want about how our goal is the health of the American people. However, you've got Dow Chemical, who want to share a pesticide that is known to do.
What's going on in our system is so despicable. It's like literally you have these dialysis companies being like, well, we make more money with the inpatient. What's that? Portable dialysis? Like you can like stack it up over and over again, where there are companies that are just parasites on making money off of like every step in the healthcare delivery process.
But it goes deeper than that, and it's darker than that. In fact, the only reason, you and I both know, the only reason why Obama didn't go for universal health care at the beginning was because the health insurance companies told him as far as he was able to go. So we can talk about all the evidence we want. The evidence is that we are selling pesticides that we know do harm to a developing child's brain. The evidence is how sick people are, how much asthma there is, how much autism there is, how much environmental toxicity is, how much toxins there are in our food, how horrible these animal factory farms are, what we are doing to our topsoil, what we are doing to our mountaintops. And I do think that this is the moment we're living in. We're going to have to, if the Democratic Party is going to look at itself in the mirror, that's the evidence we're going to have to look at. How much have been too willing, the Democratic Party. We know about the Republican Party. We know the Republican Party has been bought hook, line, and sinker by the corporatist mentality. But the Democrats are still trying to ameliorate the pain on the periphery, but with an unwillingness on the part of too many, particularly in the Democratic corporate leadership, to challenge the underlying forces that make all that suffering inevitable. And until we're going to be willing to get down and dirty with what that conversation really is, I think the more sort of polite, cheerful conversations, while they're important, and I think we all appreciate you because you keep us happy. What you provide emotionally, you provide emotionally is really important. But I also think, and I know you know this, that we're going to have to get more down and more authentic with what's really wrong, or the Democratic Party will not return to its real values. And electorally, we might not be as lucky next time as we look like we are today.
I agree with your diagnosis of the need. I'm going to do everything I can to help. I appreciate the fact that you think I'm positive. I make people happy. I do have very, this. I mean, we like spent all this time on the trail together.
Well,
I'm pushing. I'm pushing people. Let's put it that way. Like I'm doing everything I can to help. I wish that it was working better. I wish that it were faster. I wish that it was more. I wish that I had the ability to have some of the awesome candidates that you and I both backed, like win their races, get to Congress. I wish that we had a unified Congress and we could have this vision get codified into law like yesterday. I try and temper my own ambitions and energy because I'm actually a fairly impatient guy. I mean, I obviously, ran for president out of kind of nowhere.
I remember.
But so it's like simultaneously, it's like I'm trying to have a longer term perspective or medium term perspective. Be like, look, I'm not going to be able to get this all done right now, but here's what I can get done, and let me push that, while being impatient. It's like I'm trying to combine those two things. I don't know how good a job I'm doing.
You are taking the bore from within track, and that's where your heart is leading you, and you're being effective in many ways there. I believe that there needs to be some radical truth telling at this point. And I think one of that is not necessarily allowed in the rooms where you're boring from within. But what I appreciate about my relationship with you, Andrew, is I feel that you and I on a personal level can share both perspectives. And I always appreciate the opportunity to have a public conversation with you, because that back and forth that you and I have, I believe it does embody a back and forth that exists in the hearts and minds of a lot of people who we know.
I agree with you. I am both uplifted by you and learn from you every time we talk. And that you're just a very elevated person and truth teller. And spending even this time with you, like I feel like it sharpens my thinking. It sharpens my perception of the need. I agree with everything you say. And it does, frankly, make me question whether my approaches are the optimal ones. It's like I think I'm a fairly effective person. I'm continuously trying to optimize. But I learn a lot from you every time, and I've changed my behaviors based on my conversations with you.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I do feel I have a little bit of a role. We all have roles in each other's lives.
You have a role to play for all of us, Marianne. Seriously, I feel like if Trump's like this terrible avatar of some of the worst human impulses, you're like this polar opposite. You're like an avatar of humanity and circumspection and truth. I mean, it's beautiful. Yeah, you don't play that role just for me. I mean, you play that role for millions.
Well, thank you. I hope that relationship will continue. I know that the relationship between you and me and how we experience that personally, I feel very confident will continue. I know that we both see value in it, but I hope that what the conversation represents in terms of the larger culture and the political sphere, I hope that will continue as well, and that it will lead to good results. I love you, Andrew. Thank you. Thank you, darling.
The team up forever, Marianne. You just keep on. We guys got to keep pushing. It's fucking terrible. I mean, it's unacceptable and unconscionable what we've let happen. And this is a celebration. It's a day of celebration.
It is a day of celebration and deep gratitude. I love you. Thank you very, very much for talking to me, and I look forward to the next time it happens. All my best, darling. My first question today is from Sandy. She says, what is one spiritual principle, individually and as a nation, we can draw from as we navigate these challenging times? Well, there are two spiritual principles that are very important to me as we navigate all this. First of all, there is a universal spiritual theme that love always wins. The idea is that, as Martin Luther King would say, as you work towards justice, you have cosmic companionship, that there is an invisible force field that, whether you speak of it in secular or in religious and spiritual terms, it's like angels that have your back as you move in the direction of the good, the true, and the beautiful. You know, in the Jewish religion, in the Talmud, there is a saying that there is an angel bent over every blade of grass, whispering, "Grow, grow, grow." The will of God has never not been done. That's the spiritual principle. Love will prevail. Now, the 3 days between the crucifixion and the resurrection, like the 40 years that the Israelites wandered in the desert, are symbolic representations of the time that it takes between the condition of injustice and lovelessness and the time in which love and justice once again prevail. And that's where free will come in. What is already spiritually coded into the universe, according to spiritual tradition, is that we will get there. But what those 3 days and 40 years represent is the message that how long that will take and how much suffering will have to come first is completely up to us. There's a line in the Course in Miracles that says, "It is not up to you what you learn. It is merely up to you whether you learn through joy or through pain." And that takes us to the next spiritual principle, Sandy, and that has to do with the fact that we are on this earth to love each other. We are on this earth to love one another. We are on this earth, as it is said in the Jewish religion, tikkun olam, to repair the world. We need to evolve. We were talking earlier about how we need to evolve from an economic bottom line to a humanitarian bottom line. We need to evolve from a species who sees its purpose as using the world to get whatever we want to a change of heart, which is reflected in public policies, which has to do with our realizing we are on this earth to heal the world. Think how that would change our attitudes towards global poverty. Think how that would change our attitude towards the fact that 12,000 children starve on this planet every day. Think about how this would change our attitude towards climate change and environmental degradation. Think how this would change our attitude towards peace creation. You know, COVID is a wake-up call, and I believe that the Trump presidency has been a wake-up call. But we have to ask ourselves, have we really woken up? Because the next wake-up call could be even more harsh. And if, God forbid, the next wake-up call is in the form of a nuclear disaster, then there's no guarantee that we will wake up at all. So each and every one of us has a part to play. This is a time for all of us to read better books. This is a time for all of us to think deeper thoughts. This is a time for all of us to put aside, to put away some of the, we can now see to have been ultimately meaningless preoccupations which have dominated our lives. We have sort of farmed out deep thinking, when it has come to our democratic institutions. Oh, somebody's taking care of all that. Well, I think the Trump presidency has shown a lot of us. Really? You sure about that? Because what happened was that the American people took our eye off the ball. Far too many of the best and the brightest thinkers in the United States have been too disengaged from politics over the last few decades, or the problems that we have now could never have occurred. But we're waking up. It's the 11th hour, but it's not midnight yet. We just had one big win, I believe, in the fact that Donald Trump was denied a second term. But that doesn't mean that we don't still have a lot to do in the few minutes that are left before midnight. So we need to create a new America, and we need to begin with our own imagination. Everything that happens on the outside begins first on the inside. A new conversation that we're having with ourselves, a new conversation that we're having with each other. And I hope you feel that this podcast includes some of the most important conversations going forward. Okay. Now, Zachary says, how do you think an agenda for mental health care for all should be executed in the United States? What do you think it will take for this to be taken seriously? Do you think a global agenda for mental health care is possible? on the debate stage, when I was on the debate stage for the Democratic nomination, when the topic of healthcare came up, I said that we had to ask ourselves why Americans are so sick to begin with compared to people in other countries. And in order to do that, to really recognize that we don't so much have a healthcare system as we have a sickness care system, we're going to have to look at all of the things that contribute to our having so much chronic illness. That has to do with our chemical policies, our food policies, our lifestyles, etc. Now, when it comes to mental health, the same is true. All of a sudden, we have this mental health crisis. And then we talk about what to do about the mental health crisis. And for my taste, too much of the conversation about the mental health crisis is centered around psychopharmacology. Now, I'm not saying that psychotherapeutic drugs never have a place in someone's life, because I think they undoubtedly do. And I appreciate and respect that. And I'm as grateful as the next person for the fact that they exist where needed. However, the fact that we have so many Americans on pharmaceuticals, period, much less on the antidepressants and other psychopharmacological solutions for mental health issues, says as much about the marketing of big pharma as it says about the actual nature of the problem. Let's not forget, we have attorneys general all over the country who began prosecuting and indicting big pharmaceutical executives for their known role in the opioid crisis. We know that the Sackler family and Purdue, we know all that happened now having to do with at the very least, obfuscating the facts, manipulating pharmacists and doctors into believing certain things were not addictive that they absolutely know were. And hundreds of thousands of Americans died because of that. So I've always felt that it's naive of us to just assume that in every other area, big pharma is as pure as the driven snow in its marketing practices. Remember, when you have an unfettered capitalist system, and I'm not anti-capitalist, but there's a virulent strain of capitalism that has taken hold in this country over the last few decades. A capitalism which does not think of itself as owing anything other than financial fiduciary responsibility to its own stockholders, even at the expense of any moral or ethical consideration regarding people and planet. So it's all about creating market share. It's all about creating markets where there didn't even necessarily have to be one. So I don't want to just jump into, the government has to address mental health, especially knowing that big pharmaceutical lobbyists are just chomping at the bit for that one. They just love that one. And some of you might realize how much trouble I got into when I dared to suggest such things during my presidential campaign. Big pharma, no. And I must say, sometimes the Democratic Party is to big pharma the way people in the Republican Party are to NRA. You simply do not go there. You simply do not question. And I think as Americans, a healthy skepticism towards any entity of vast power is absolutely a responsibility of citizenship. So if we are to do that, that means that we're to ask, why are so many people having mental health crises to begin with? And this takes me back to an argument that I make throughout my conversation with you, and that has to do with the chronic economic tension and anxiety which pervades the life of tens of millions of Americans. We have a thing-centered rather than a love-centered society. We have a society in which money matters more than people, and it has gotten to the point now where it's the ocean in which we swim. When you have tens of millions of Americans, as I mentioned before, for whom a $400 unexpected expenditure would be more than they could handle. And that was even before the pandemic. Remember, we have 8 to 9 million people more since the pandemic began who have been thrown into poverty. All of this while our government has refused to give enough direct cash relief. People got that one $1,200 payment, plus the unemployment benefits that now have run out, and how many people were not employed to begin with. We are not having the conversation about the amount of human suffering that is going on in our midst right now that we should be having. And even now, where is that direct cash relief? When is it going to be here? I don't think probably most of the people who are even listening to this podcast right now truly appreciate, perhaps, or have really thought long and hard about the desperate conditions that so many of our fellow citizens are living in right now. But my major point has to do with the desperation that so many Americans were living in before that. If you every single day live with the realization that you really don't know what you'll do if you get sick, And you really don't know what you'll do if your children get sick. And you really don't know how you're going to ever send your kid to college. How will you ever be able to afford it? And how will you ever be able to get rid of these college loan debts? That is mental tension. What do you think a mental health crisis is, except a level of mental tension and anxiety that just goes beyond what people can handle because it's chronic and it never ends. So in order to really address the mental health crisis in the United States, we have to look to where it emanates from. And that is the basic governing principle that dominates our political and economic system. Looking to, this is what we do in this country. The dominant political and economic system creates a problem. And then in order to fix the problem, we look to them to fix it. They created it. That's why we've got to fundamentally alter things. That's what I felt when I was running for president. The idea was that only people who had careers spent for decades in the car that drove us into this ditch should possibly be considered qualified to drive us out of it. No, we need new thinking because our political system is stuck in a 20th century paradigm. They look at problems mainly through the filter of 20th century thinking. 21st century thinking is much more holistic. It's much more whole person, less mechanistic. You have Fortune 500 CEOs who go to conferences where they have meditation sessions. You have people who go to educational conferences where they talk about educating the whole child. You have Harvard University having symposiums on integrative medicine, and we need to take politics forward the way every other culture of our society has moved forward, and that is to a genuinely holistic and integrative kind of thinking. So that's how I feel about mental health. What I'd want to say to every politician in America is if you want to address the mental health crisis in America, first ask yourselves, what are the policies that you guys are perpetrating that cause so many people to feel crazy to begin with, to feel like I can't handle the pain, I can't handle the despair. That's what we need to look at, not just effects, but cause, not just symptoms, but the things that actually caused these sicknesses to begin with. And that applies as much to our mental health as it does to our physical health. This is an important question, and I think we should all listen to this woman with great seriousness. Hi, Marianne. I've been a huge fan and follower of your work since the 1990s after reading A Return to Love. Thank you for all you do. Thank you, Dory. I am a proud retired Air Force veteran and do not feel I can ever allow those who truly supported Trump, Pence, and many of their enablers, especially when they allowed him to insult our military, intelligence agencies, which includes our military, POWs, women, immigrants, blacks, and other minorities. They used and abused religion and used it as cover to do further damage. I have little tolerance for the patriarchy and white supremacy. There is little to no excuse for voluntary ignorance, and especially today with information literally at our fingertips. My question is this: why should I be expected to get over or forgive those who were okay with a guy in his administration that degraded all that I personally stood for over 21 years? I was in the intelligence community for over 32 years, military and as a contractor. I am a woman. I'm a disabled veteran. I feel it's critical for us to maintain healthy boundaries and choose our tribe carefully. I do want to help fix what's broken and do not wish ill will on anyone, but I will not give my time and energy to anyone, family or friends, who supported him and then voted for him again. Does this sound irrational? Thank you in advance. Warmest regards, Dory O. Well, first of all, Dory, I want to say what I think a lot of people are thinking, which is thank you for your service. You know, Dory, there's been a real conversation recently about information silos. And people who have only been watching Fox News or some of the even more, far right-wing news sources in this country, honestly have not been seeing some of the examples of the president's speeches, et cetera, that you and I have been seeing. That's one issue. Secondly, America isn't about the fact that all of us agree all the time, because we don't. I had an interesting experience during this Trump presidency, and I don't think it was an accident. And that is that two women who are real friends of mine who I love and trust very much were Trump supporters. One is a business colleague with whom I worked for many years, and I know her to be a woman of great integrity. In fact, when she told me that she was voting for Trump before the 2016 election, I got very depressed. And my friend said to me, "Why are you depressed?" I said, "Because he's going to win." People said, "What are you talking about? He's going to win." I said, "No, he's going to win because the woman I know who's voting for him is not crazy. So if he got her, he's going to win." We handled it by just never discussing politics. I know one woman said to me, "Marianne, my husband is a Trump supporter." And she said, "I can't go there." She said, "My kids are upset about it. I'm upset about it." But she said, "If I go there, this could be divorce material. What do you think I should do?" And I said to her, "Be careful and don't go there. Because one day this will be over. We still want to have our friendships. We want to have our marriages. We want to have our love affairs. We want to have our relationships with our close friends and family." So, listen, when the Civil Rights Act passed, that didn't mean racists in the South and promulgators of segregation didn't still exist here. When the 19th Amendment was passed and women had the right to vote, that didn't mean that people who didn't think women should have the right to vote had necessarily changed their minds yet. You know, America has its racists and anti-Semites and homophobes and LGBTQ plus people who don't believe in the rights of the gay community. But in a democracy, you have votes, and whoever has the most votes wins in terms of the direction that we will collectively take in terms of our behavior. And I also think that we want to remember that many people, even who heard me just now, said, "Hey, wait a minute, sister. I voted for Trump, but I'm not a racist. I'm not a homophobe. I'm not an anti-Semite. How dare you call me that?" Well, many of us would say, "Yeah, but you voted for someone who is." And if you don't realize how many things he has said to demonstrate his prejudice against any of those groups, then, as I said at the beginning, Tori, you haven't been watching the same stuff we've been watching because we have it on tape. When you have a president who says about Nazis who've been walking down the street saying Jews shall not replace us, and the president says, well, there are good people on both sides, and then obviously his aides tell him he has to come the next day and make sure that he says something to cover it up, but we heard him say it. And this is where we are. We are in all this tumult. But your basic question, Dory, is how are we going to forgive and move on? Well, I think we need to look at South Africa and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Bishop Tutu. We're going to have to. And also, I think we all have to look at the ways that we played a part through our own chronic political disengagement in allowing things to get to where they've gotten. It's always easy. And everybody on both sides of the political spectrum, we do this. We point at other people and say they were the problem. But many of the things that so many of us identify as the problems today are symptoms of the real problem. And the real problem is that we took our eye off the ball. Too many of us thought politics was somebody else's issue. Oh, I'm not political. You're political if you breathe the air, given that there are policies made every day that determine whether or not the air is safe to breathe. If you drink the water in America, given the fact that there are policy decisions every day that affect how safe the drinking water is. If you eat the food in America, given that there are policies made every single day that affect the health of our food supply, then you're political. And I've been saying for a long time, every public issue will make it to your private door. So I know for myself, I just want to forgive myself and others. There's so much meanness. There's so much meanness that will not help us. Spiritually, miracles occur naturally in the presence of love. We can love each other without agreeing with each other. Martin Luther King said, God said, I have to love my enemies. He didn't say I have to like them. Martin Luther King, think of what he had seen. The people had bombed his own house. They had bombed those children in those churches. He had seen hoses and dogs brought out against people civil rights workers killed, and yet he stood on the principle that love is the way. And it was his standing on that principle that awakened the conscience of a nation. The new America will not be born out of anger. The new America will be born from love. Okay, everybody, that's it for us this week. Thank you so much for being with me. Get on my mailing list by going to Marianne.com. And if you want to ask me a question, remember, go to Marianne@castmedia.com. Take care of yourself and those you love this week. And I hope everything goes great until we meet again. Thanks.